Welcome to the Leadership Development Training Module, How to Have Difficult Conversations. My name is Sabrina Baker, and I will be your facilitator. This training module is recorded podcast style, meaning audio only. The slide that you see on your screen will not be changing. It is only there as a screen holder. If you need to minimize this window and work on other things while you are listening, then you can certainly do that and still be able to hear the training. However, we all know that multitasking is a myth. So I would encourage you to try not to be too distracted, get too deep into working on something so that you really can hear the next 30 minutes or so of this lesson. These training modules are only as effective as how well you are able to take them in and then how well you are able to use them in your leadership style and with your team. So if you get too distracted and you can't really hear what I'm saying, then you're not going to be able to find this to be an effective help for you. And I certainly want it to be that. So minimize if you need to, work on other things while you're listening, but try to make sure that you have one ear trained to my words so that the next time you have to have these conversations, you know what you need to do to work through them. Having said all that, let's jump right into the lesson. Regardless of your position in the company, your level of leadership, how long you've been doing it, how long you've been working, chances are good that you have already come across a time when you've had to have a difficult conversation. These conversations pop up in the workplace for a variety of reasons. It could be performance issues where you have an employee who is not performing up to expectations. They could be behavioral where you have an employee who is not showing up to work on time or at all. It could be more serious, such as a layoff or a termination, or it could be interpersonal conflicts, employees not getting along. Whatever it is, and amongst a variety of reasons that it could happen, the need to have this difficult conversation, chances are good you've already come across them. And chances are good you're going to come across them in the future. Now, there's one thing that I want you to know up front. These conversations are difficult for a reason, and we never want them to get easier. This training module is not necessarily designed to make having difficult conversations easier. We are dealing with people here. We are dealing with human emotion and feelings, and having difficult conversations is never going to be an easy task. So I don't want you to ever think that your leadership is diminished by the fact that these difficult conversations make you so nervous. I think the fact that they make you nervous shows how empathetic you are to your workforce, and that's a really important trait in a leader. What I'm hoping this training module is going to do is just give you a framework. It's going to give you a step-by-step path, things that you know you're going to need to do before, during, and after the conversation to make it go as best as it possibly can. And more importantly, to make the conversation be delivered in a way that the employee can actually hear what you're saying and implement any changes that they need to implement on their end, because that's the goal of any difficult conversation. Now, before we get into those steps, before we get into pre-conversation, what happens during and what you're going to do after, I want to talk about timing for a second. And this is really, really important. Difficult conversations should never be had on the fly. We should not be just jumping up from our office and running into another office with an employee and laying a difficult conversation on them. Further, and you know this from every other aspect in your life, difficult conversations should never be had when you are angry. Something has really gone wrong in a meeting. Something has really gone wrong at work. A customer is really angry and they have taken it out on you, and so now you are really angry. That is not the time to have a difficult conversation. What we have to think about in leaders, and we talk about this in a lot of our leadership development training modules, is reacting versus responding. As leaders, it is our responsibility to respond to situations and not react to them. And so if that means that we have to take a time out for ourselves and go take a walk and get some fresh air, it's okay to do that. One of the reasons that leaders don't is that they have had it drilled in their heads that they need to be able to deliver real-time feedback. You should be able to, in the moment, deliver this real-time feedback. And while that is important, that feedback is not going to be heard if you are shouting and you are angry and you are not delivering the message in a way that that employee can hear it. So the best thing for you to do, if you have to deliver difficult conversations and it is affecting you emotionally, you are worked up, you are anxious, you are angry, whatever it may be, is to let the employee know, hey, you know what, we're going to talk about this, but I'm going to go calm down, and then we will revisit when we're both ready. It's okay to do that. And so I don't want you to feel like you have to give this real-time, in-the-moment feedback if your emotions are not there where you can be calm and rational. At the same time, we do have to give timely feedback. So it's this balance. It's this balance of responding appropriately, but responding in a timely manner. If you can be calm and collected in the moment, great. If not, you want to do whatever you can do to get yourself to that place as quickly as possible to where you can sit down, go through the steps we're going to walk through, and give feedback. I'm sure that you have had a time in your life when a coworker or a supervisor or maybe even a loved one has delivered feedback months, weeks, days after the event occurred. And between that time of the event occurring, maybe you hurt their feelings, maybe you said something inappropriately at work, between the time of that actually happening and the feedback being delivered, they haven't acted like anything is wrong. They've really been fine. And so you wonder when they finally deliver that feedback, is it really that big of a deal? Did it really matter? Because they've gone on for 3 weeks now and everything's been fine. So why now are they bringing this up? The same thing happens with your employees. So we have to be able to give timely feedback, but we need to be able to do it in a manner that is thoughtful and that is going to have the impact that we want it to have. The longer you go in terms of weeks, the less impact your feedback is going to have to employees, regardless of how well thought out it is, regardless of how well you deliver it, regardless of the words that you use. If you have let a ton of time lapse, days, weeks, between the event and the delivery of the feedback, it is not going to have the impact that you want. So you want to make sure that you respond appropriately and in a calm, rational manner, but at the same time that you do that in a timely manner. It's a delicate balance. There's not an answer of you have to deliver feedback in 24 days or 24 hours, or you have to deliver it in 2 days. There's no number there. There's no exact time frame that I can tell you that is the best time frame to deliver it. It's all up to you and your employee and your workspace. Just remember that we want to respond thoughtfully, but also timely. All right, let's get to the 3 different steps of these difficult conversations, or really I should say the 3 different phases of these conversations. The first one is pre-conversation. So we are not going to have these conversations on the fly. We just talked about that. I sometimes call of that verbal vomit. So when we're just walking into somebody's office and we just spew a bunch of words on them, that is supposed to be this feedback, we are no longer going to do that. It feels like a drive-by almost. It feels like they have just been, out of nowhere been slapped in the face. And so we need to have this pre-conversation time where we sit down and plan out how we want the conversation to go. Now, understandably, because we are dealing with a different human being and then another person is going to be in the room, we can't plan for every scenario that's going to happen. We don't know exactly what they're going to say or how they're going to respond. But if you've been paying attention, you can probably guess a few things that they may say, a few ways that they may react. You know your employees if you have been working with them. And so you can start to anticipate a little bit of how they may take the feedback, what their reasons or their pushback may be with you. And in this pre-conversation time, we're going to cover all that. So the first thing that you're going to think about in your pre-conversation time is the purpose of the conversation. What happened? What is the issue that has come up that has made you need to have this conversation? And one of the ways that we can keep people from getting defensive inside of difficult conversations is to focus on the situation or the behavior. We want to be very, very specific. Here is exactly what happened. You were responsible for getting that report to the customer on time, and you were late. That is very, very specific. It is the situation. The situation is that we had a due date. The action was that due date was missed. And so we want to be as specific and give as many examples as we possibly can. If we have something like an attendance issue or an employee just being late all the time, then we obviously have some very specific dates that we can give them and examples of that behavior. So you want to think about the situation that happened, the behavior that happened, not necessarily focus on the person or, do a lot of pointing fingers or blaming, but really talk about, here's what we expected, here's what came out of that, and that gap is why we have to have this conversation today. And so you want to think through, what are those examples? What is the purpose of this conversation? Then you want to think about the goal of the conversation. At the end of the conversation, what do you want to happen? Is it that the person now has to not miss any more time? Is it that they have to go to the customer and apologize for the missed deadline and work with the customer to figure out the solution and when they can get the information to them? What is going to be the goal of the conversation? You want to think about what that outcome is going to be. And you want to be sort of specific with that as well. You can't just say, I just want it to be better, or I just want them to stop doing what they're doing. There has to be some very specifics. And so you need to give them a goal. When we talk about having the conversation, you're going to see that I encourage you to give them a reason to follow up, something that they're going to come back to you with and say, okay, here's what I'm doing. What is that goal? What does that look like for you? Also, during your pre-conversation time, when you're thinking through this, you are going to plan your words. Now, if you hear nothing else in this training module, I want you to hear this. Framing is key. How we frame information changes everything. It changes the entire dynamic of the conversation. Our words, our message is only as good as how the employees hear it. So we can use the best words. We can put together the best sentences. But if our employees cannot hear it, they cannot process what we're saying because it's not framed in a way that they can do that, then they are not going to hear a word that we're saying. And so you have to sit down and think about this particular employee. How do they like to be communicated to? What is their personality like? How likely are they to immediately get defensive? What can I do when they get defensive? You have to think about how you're going to frame information in a way that they can hear it. This means choosing your words wisely. And I often encourage leaders, when you are sitting down to have a difficult conversation, pull up a thesaurus. I know that it might sound crazy, but pull up a thesaurus. Think about the words that you want to say, so that the way that you want to say it to the employee. And then look at those words and think about which one of them might put them on the defensive. Which one of these words might really flip this conversation into an ugly conversation. Pull up a thesaurus and let's see if we can't find a better way to say it. It is my belief that there is a way to say anything in the world, the most devastating news, the most harshest of feedback, but you have to do it in a way that people can hear it. So this is where you have to sit down, and this is why we're not going to just do this on the fly. You have to sit down and think about the words that you are going to say. Think about their conversational style. Think about their personality. If you've gone through any kind of personality typing in your workplace or personality style with them, you may know their personality type. That is a huge help to figuring out how people like to be talked to, how they take in information, and will help you frame the conversation in a way that hopefully they can hear it and take away what you want them to take away. In this pre-conversation time, you're going to write a few talking points that are going to help you stay focused. As I mentioned, you are dealing with another individual. You cannot plan for everything that they're going to say or everything that they're going to do. So having a few talking points written down are going to, one, make sure you cover everything, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, we forget something that we really should have said, and reminding them of something that we needed to, we forget to do that. And so having those talking points are going to make sure that you cover all of the things that you need to cover. You also want to think about what objections are they going to have? What pushback could they potentially have? In the example of the employee who missed a deadline for a customer, maybe they were waiting on another employee and that employee was late. And so they may bring that up. How are you going to answer to that when they bring that up in the conversation? Well, you certainly can't plan for everything. And I wouldn't encourage you to sit and try to plan for everything. You can sit and think about what are the obvious objections, what are the obvious things that they're going to say, and how am I going to answer to those things? And then the last thing that you are going to do in pre-conversation is think about when, where, and how you're going to have this conversation. And when I say those things, I mean logistics. So I'm talking about, is this going to be in your office? Is it going to be in a conference room? When, time of day. Sometimes time of day matters immensely. I always like to give the example that I am not a morning person. I never have been. I never will be. If you want to have a difficult conversation with me, the time to do it is not when I first show up to work, because I'm still waking up. I'm still on my first cup of coffee. I need to ease into my day. And that's just my personality. And so I'm going to hear you better if you wait until later in the afternoon when I'm fully engaged, I'm awake, I'm going, I'm getting my best work done. I'm going to hear anything that you have to say better. So thinking about those little nuances with our employees, and when are they at their best, and when are they at their most calm and rational. Obviously, during stressful times, it might be difficult to find that, but doing your best to think about location and time of day, and then minimizing those distractions. So ensuring that you're not backing up to another meeting where if this difficult conversation goes long, you're going to have to run out because you're going to have to run to another meeting. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you have plenty of time to be able to have the conversation, allow the employee to say what they need to say, allow you to say what you need to say, and not be distracted by your phone buzzing or your assistant walking in and telling you about a phone call or email dinging, any of those things. You want to turn off all of those distractions and make sure that you have no distractions so that the employee who's having to hear this difficult conversation feels like at least you are focused on them. That's the big point, that they feel like you're at least engaged and focused on who they are, what they're doing, and how you're going to work through this together. Okay, so all of that happens before you actually have the conversation. Now let's talk about, what do you do during the conversation? My first tip, and this is the one that I think is maybe most meaningful, is to get right to it. Regardless of whether the individual is somebody who likes direct conversation or doesn't, no one coming into one of these sessions wants 45 minutes of small talk before you deliver some constructive feedback. Chances are good in most situations, they know that if they're being called into your office or you've set a meeting with them, that you're wanting to have a difficult conversation. They know that. They're a little nervous coming in. They anticipate some things. They've been thinking about it as well. So get right to it. Do not feel like you have to beat around the bush. Certainly you want to make them feel comfortable. I'm not saying that before they're even fully in their chair, you just dive right in. You want them to feel comfortable and you want to make sure that they are okay and the atmosphere is good. But you don't want to delay too long. You really want to get to the point and let them know up front, look, I have to have a really honest conversation with you. And I want the both of us to be able to talk openly during this conversation. I want us to be able to work through this together. I want to figure out what happened here. I want to talk to you about what happened here. I want to give you my perspective. I want to give you my expectations, and I want you to be able to do the same. We need to be able to set a safe place for our employees. They need to know that these conversations are not fun for you or them. They're not something that either of you ever want to have to do, but sometimes they're necessary. And we want to set that atmosphere that when we have to have them, we're going to work through it together. As I said earlier, empathy is huge. It is a huge trait for leaders. And it is one that if you look at any leadership poll today, employees want. They want to know that their leaders are empathetic to who they are, to to their jobs, what they're going through, the challenges that they face. And so when you're having difficult conversations, the best thing that you can do is show empathy to the employee, telling them, I get it. I get why this could happen. I understand how this may have happened. What are we going to do in the future, though? How are we going to move past this and get to a place where it's not happening anymore? And so getting right into the conversation, but doing everything with empathy and making sure that they understand you know where they're coming from, you know what they're facing, and you are here not to just point the finger and point the blame and tell them all the things they're doing wrong, but you are there to figure out how you're going to help them through it. You also want to stay on message the entire time. And you have employees who certainly know how to do this. They know how to derail. They know how to deflect. And it's going to be important. This is why we have those talking points. This is why we've written down and we've thought about all of the things that we need to say before we walked into the meeting, is that we want to stay on message. So if the employee, if you give them feedback about, in the example of the employee who was late with a customer deadline, and they start blaming another employee, well, I was waiting on Susie's work. I couldn't do my work until Susie sent me her work. And so, that's why it was late. That's fine. They can say that. They have every right to say that. And it could be that maybe Susie needs her own difficult conversation, but we are not there to talk about Susie. And so in that moment, you want to say, look, I hear you. I appreciate where you're coming from, but we're here to talk about your part of this. We're here to focus on where we can do better in the future with the point of work where you take over. And so making sure that you are not getting too distracted, that you are staying on the message, and that you are reiterating to them anytime they try to deflect, anytime that they are trying to blame or get off message, that you are bringing it right back and saying, I hear you. However, the point here is this. This is why we're in this meeting. I appreciate that you feel that way. I hear what you're saying, but the point of this meeting is X. Now, you never want to get into discussing other employees. You never want to tell an employee, hey, I hear you that Susie was late. I'm going to talk to Susie. That's not for that employee to know. You want to really keep the focus on them. We're here to talk about you and your performance or your behavior and not Susie. So let's focus on your part of this. Sometimes, no matter what you do, no matter how you prepare, they're going to get upset. And they're going to get visibly, physically upset. And there may be a point in the conversation where you have to say, you know what? No matter what else I say here, you're not going to hear me. So let's take a break. It's okay to do that most of the time. You certainly have to be able to know your employee and know if they're going to run out of the conference room and cause a big ruckus. And you don't want to allow that. But if you feel like maybe you need to take a break and revisit, that's okay. Or maybe you just change up the scenery. Maybe you say, you know what, I can see that you're getting physically upset. Why don't we go for a walk outside? Get out of the building, go for a walk together. Sometimes just having that motion of exercise while you're going through these emotions helps you get to a calmer place. So read what is happening. You want to read their body language. You want to read, certainly hear what they're saying. And if you need to change it up a little bit, change your tactics up, use different words, change the scenery, do that. Absolutely. I always say that I would prefer to have difficult conversations outside on a park bench where nobody's going to walk by and hear than I would in a stuffy conference room, especially if you have one of those conference rooms that's all glass all the way around and everybody can see you, so that the employee can have their moment of anger if they need to, or their moment of pushback. But then just by nature of where we are, they're probably going to come back to a calmer state and be able to hear what I'm saying. I always take people outside. Not always feasible for everybody, I understand, but just an idea of how you might be able to diffuse just by your surroundings. A couple of other things that we're going to do during the conversation. We are going to avoid the but sandwich. That's B-U-T sandwich. The but sandwich goes like this. Hey, Susie, so you were late with that report, but you're a really good employee, but you were late with that report. But I appreciate that you're so good most of the time. We don't want to do that because that confuses Susie. Susie's now saying, wait, is the report being late bad, but I'm a good employee? I don't know what I am anymore. So sometimes we, in our own personalities, we just want to pepper bad news with good news. So we want to say, hey, I didn't like how you do that, but I like you and you're a great employee. Do not do that at all. As much as you can avoid it, you don't want to do it because you don't want to confuse them. And sometimes because we're so uncomfortable saying the difficult conversation, we will pepper all this good stuff in, and then they leave the room never knowing that that was a difficult conversation, never knowing that they had performance issues or behavioral issues, because all they're going to hear is all of that good stuff you're peppering in. So you want to be able to stay on that message of, here is the issue. This may be a great employee, and maybe this is the first time they've ever had any kinds of issues. And you can appreciate that, but you don't want to pepper your language to the point that you're confusing them on, wait, am I in trouble or am I not in trouble? I'm not really sure. You want throughout the conversation to ask questions to make sure they understand what you're saying. I had a director many years ago who would always say, are you with me? Are you with me? And it almost got to be a little annoying and a little bit of a joke for us because she was always saying, are you with me? Are you with me? But then I've realized throughout the years that I do something very similar. Does that make sense? That's what I always say. Does that make sense? Are you hearing me? And so it's our way of just checking that, are my words landing? Is the message that I'm trying to deliver landing with you? So make sure that you are asking questions so that they understand. Questions like, do you understand the expectations around this? Do you understand why this is a problem? Do you understand what led to this happening? Do you even know in your own work what led to this point? Asking those questions to make sure that they really understand what you're saying. And if they don't, you stay in that room until they do. You stay there and reframe your messaging. Keep trying to use different words, different ways of saying it so that they truly understand what it is that you're saying. You want to do 3 things at the very end of the conversation. You want to make sure that you provide actionable steps. So a good technique is to ask them, what do you think we should do from here? Where do you think we should go with this? What can I expect to see in the next few days, next few weeks out of you that tells me you've heard this and that we're going to rectify whatever it is? But put a goal in place. Have a plan. When they walk out of that office, they need to know what the plan is for them to make right whatever it is that's going on. You want to ask them what they need from you. What can I do for you? What do you need from me to be successful in this? Can I give you more training? Can I, work closer with you? Do you need more of my time? Sometimes that's really important, is that they get more of the leader's time. So asking them what they need from you to be successful. And then finally, make sure you provide that open door to discuss further, and then provide a specific time that you're going to follow up. So the post-conversation, of course, is that you are going to follow up, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But you want to make sure that you let them know that. While this topic is considered closed from us having to have this kind of conversation about it, it's not closed from the fact that we're going to follow up and make sure that we're on the same page, and we're going to follow up and talk about how we can start to rebuild this relationship, which leads me into the follow-up. So after the conversation, what are you going to do? You're going to do exactly what you told them you were going to do. You're going to go to them in a day or a week, depending on what the conversation was, depending on the relationship, depending on what their action items were. You will know what the time frame for follow-up is, but you're going to go to them and you're going to follow up. You're going to ask them, have you had any other thoughts or any other feedbacks after our conversation? Do you have any other questions? What have you done since then to rectify the situation? How can I help you? Have you thought of any other ways that I can help you? So you want to make sure that you are actually doing what you say. Again, feedback loses its credibility when you don't hold your end of the bargain. So when you give it late, or you don't actually give specifics, or you don't follow up when you say you're going to, then that feedback starts to lose its credibility. And so you want to make sure that you are doing what you say you're going to do. You want to think about how you're going to repair this relationship. Sometimes these difficult conversations can put a little rift in a relationship. How are you going to repair that? How are you going to make sure that you and the employee are able to get past this and move forward, especially if this is an employee that you are hoping to keep and hoping to have a good, long relationship with, working relationship? You want to think about how you're going to repair that. And then the last thing, and this is maybe sometimes the most difficult, depending on what the employee did, depending on what's going on with them, sometimes we leaders can hold grudges. And so you want to be careful not to dub an employee who you have had a difficult conversation with as a bad employee. You don't want to write them off, especially if this is the first conversation that you've had. If done correctly, the employee may be able to bounce back from this and be a really valuable employee. And it is our responsibility as leaders to give them that chance. In conclusion, there is no way to make every difficult conversation easy. But with the right preparation, they become more manageable. Walking through these steps that I've given you, thinking about the conversation before you actually have it, staying on task, changing up the scenery if things are going south and you know that they're not hearing you, using different words, thinking about the words that you're going to use, being very deliberate with the words that you are going to use, and direct but in a constructive way is going to make a world of difference in not only your confidence in delivering them, but in their ability to actually hear and move forward. The key is going to be to keep your cool, never avoid the difficult conversation, don't have it angry, and absolutely be honest about the fact that we are all humans. And while this conversation is not easy for anybody, it is necessary to move the business forward. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you have found something that you can take back to your workplace when you have to have a difficult conversation. And I hope that we see you on a leadership development training module very soon.